Hello. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? We are on week 9. Yes, and we have the poetical books tonight. It is Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Songs of Songs. But that seems like a lot, so don't get nervous. I think this one we might actually get done a lot quicker than the other books that we've done. And the reason for that is because this week I am not going so much in depth. And the reason for that is because, well, a lot of the like especially Psalms and Proverbs and Songs of Solomon, they're like you would need to go, like, especially with, well, first of all, let me say, with Psalms, you would not need to go like verse by verse because that would take forever because there's so many chapters. And then Song of Songs is kind of just one, big description. Same thing with Proverbs and same thing with Psalms. So that's what I'm going to do is you're going to have more like an overview tonight. Except the most you're going to have is out of the book of Job. And because this is what I'm saying with Job is not even close to an intense study that you can do in this book. It could take hours and hours in this book. And I just don't have that time right now. So let's just jump right in. Chapters of Job, there's 42 chapters. Okay, so this is a big book, and each chapter is just like loaded with poetical dialogue, and so it's very hard. It can be a very hard read. The author is unknown. We do know that it is in the Old Testament times. The author is sometimes refers to themselves in the third person. So the suggestion of Job being the author is a strong possibility because in that time, in the Old Testament time, a lot of the authors did refer to themselves in the third person. So whether it's Job or whether it's somebody else, we don't fully know, and we don't fully I don't know. And we know little about the dates and the setting of where Job is pertaining to. And many scholars believe that the book of Job is one of the oldest books in the Bible. And so that doesn't mean that Job himself is the oldest, because obviously, like, Genesis is first before the book of Job and all that. But this just means that the oldest, like, it was the oldest written book. That's what they're thinking. And so there are hints when you read Job. There's hints throughout, like, what ancient time period that he's truly in, because Job offered sacrifices himself for his family instead of relying on a priest, and his wealth was measured in livestock, not gold. So it's likely that Job lived sometime between the flood and the time of Moses, because he wasn't relying on a priest, because we've heard all the the other stuff of how when the temple was created and all that, and the tabernacle, how it was you don't make sacrifices yourself like the priest does it. Like, there's rules and order and structure you follow. Many scholars place Job in the patriarch period, so that's around the same time Abraham lived. And it's clear, like I was just saying, that he lived prior to the giving of the law. Since the book of Job, it makes no mention of the tabernacle or the temple or priest or the law given to Israel. So the long life of Job is another clue, because we know that during the patriarch time that the people lived longer, and it said that Job probably lived over 200 years. So that kind of, because we know that lifespan gradually decreases up until the book of the Judges. Lifespans were typically under 100 years old. By the the time of the judges. Like by the time we got to the judges, it was kind of decreasing. And so it said that Job lived probably over 200 years. So definitely in the patriarch timeline. So this book is very deep. It's very intense. It's very poetical. And so I'm not going to try in this moment, in this section of teaching, to go chapter by chapter like I have in other books, because due to the gravity of Job, it really needs its own separate teaching, just fully dedicated and just dug into like verse by verse. And so this is going to be more of an overview of what is taking place rather than an event by event process, if that makes sense. So it's like I said, it's a very intense book. You read of terrible sufferings it describes. It's a long book. It's full of complex poetical speeches, and you'll see that God has power over what Satan can and can't do. And it's like some parts of it is like beyond our human ability to understand, like the whys behind the suffering of the world. And like we see suffering may sometimes be allowed to like come in and purify us, to teach us, to test us, to strengthen the soul and all of that. So, and it shows us that God remains enough, and he deserves our request, and requests our love and praise in all circumstances of life, no matter if we're on the mountaintop or if we're in the valley, or if we're covered with boils and losing everything that we have, like Job was. We must trust God, and not only when we do not understand, because we're not going to fully understand. Like we can't get to a point, like we have to trust him even when we don't understand, is what I'm saying. Yeah. So we learn that God's ways are always perfect, because in Isaiah 55, 8-9, it says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." And that's kind of hard for us to like grasp, because just an example, like if you're watching the TV series The Chosen, I don't want to give away spoilers, but if you haven't watched it, but like there's a situation that happens with one of the main cast members, and you're left questioning, like, this was last season, so I would assume everybody's watched it, but you're left with like questioning, like, why would that happen? And so it just brings in this kind of, it's brought that, because like God's ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. And so our infinite minds can't understand the vastness of a God that is outside of our time, outside of our gravity, outside of our earth, outside of totally in a different dimension, than we are in. Like I said in the beginning, like he is outside of our dimensions. He is outside of our time. And so he is far up above. And so when we can only see this straight a little bit in front of us, like he's up outside of that. Like I said before, like he's, like in a balloon floating out like a helicopter up over, and can look down and see all the areas of which way we should turn and which way we shouldn't turn and which way we should go. And it's just trusting that no matter if he says go right, we go right. If he says go left, we go left. No matter what he says, God is right, and he works everything for the good. And so he never says that the weapon will not form. He says that it will not prosper. So the book of Job brings a little bit of that, or it brings a lot of that into the forefront when you see this, and you're like, oh my God, like this is like, you say this is a loving God, like, and these are all the questions that Job has, and it's probably all the questions that anybody has when they go through like grief, or everything that I've gone through personally. Just my personal walk and testimony. I've been before the Lord, like, what is happening? Like, even like when I don't fully understand, like, why do I have so much fatigue? Why do I have this? And like people don't understand, and then people say, well, they say, well, you've opened a door, or you've done this or you've done that, which of course I do agree with opening doors and all that aspects, but sometimes you're like what? Like what did I do? Like I need an answer. Like, and sometimes it's just it is what it is. And so a lot of that is how it is in Job. So let's look at Job 1, because Job 1 and Job 2 are fundamental to the aspect of building of what you see taking place in this. So Job 1, I know this is a lot on the screen. So there was a man in the land of Uz, forgive me, whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright. Blameless does not mean sinless, okay? It means he has integrity, like in Joshua 24:14. He has sincerity. His outward piety is matched by like a heart of genuine inward reverence for the Lord. Like he's not hiding anything. He's blameless and upright. No one who feared God and shunned evil. I'm sorry. And one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also, his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the east. And his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did regularly. All right, so now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Now this is the sons of God. Remember, if you the previous teachings of what I've talked about, the sons of God, that's angels, okay? So the sons of, gosh, if I look away for 1 second, all this just blurs together. Okay, so the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Satan is the accuser. In Hebrew it says the Satan, the accuser, okay? I have a teaching on the courtrooms of heaven, and that I encourage you to go listen to that. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabines raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away, yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, also another came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his clothes, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And all this Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. So it says that he is upright. That means that he treats other people right. He behaves with justice towards them. And it says that he feared God. I also released a word on that's what was coming back in this time is the fear of the Lord. Because you can look across America and see that America does, across the world really, that there is no fear of the Lord. And it says that Job, that he demonstrated like a true reverence of a believer who trusted the promises of God and honors the law of God. And he turned away from evil like habitually, like he had regular repentance in his life. And Job is a man who is righteous by faith in God, like every other truly righteous person. So let's read Job 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God, here we go again, those same sons of God, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also with them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth on it. This shows you that Satan is not omnipresent. He cannot be at multiple places at the same time. So when people are saying, oh, the devil's after me, the devil's after me, he's not. I understand what you're saying. I understand where you're coming from, but it's basically his minions, his demons, his mission, his assignment is coming for you. But Satan himself is not. Satan is a high-ranking angel. Like he was a cherubim angel that fell. So he is a high-ranking angel. And so if you learn the structure, I also have a teaching on my website, the structure and order of heaven and the rankings of angels. Satan would be high ranking. And so what is sent out to humans is the lower ranking. Okay, not saying that they're any, like what people go through is any less deemed, as warfare if it's not Satan himself. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's a hierarchy and there's an order, because Satan fell from the kingdom, like the King of Kings, like his kingdom, and Satan fell from that. And so he knows how the king's kingdom works, and so that is what he has established also. All right, so I hope that makes sense. So then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? And he still holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. So Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the soles of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. All right, woman, how about go sit down and be quiet? But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? And all this Job did not sin with his lips. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all the adversity, they came upon him. Each one came from its own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shunammite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar, they did not recognize him. They lifted their voices and wept, and each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. So Job, he cannot see what's happening in heaven, but we did. Like, we were seeing like an inside view. We are taken into the governmental chambers of the kingdom of heaven. And it's a vivid way of helping us understand how God governs the world. All right, so in chapters 2, verse 11 through chapter 31, verse 40, we see Job and his 3 friends interacting. The Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. So it says when they're coming that they do not recognize Job. Although it says they they wept with him. Like, they sit on the ground with Job. Like, they can't, he's like in a pit of despair, basically, and he's like estranged from them, and he's in loneliness. And so they sit without speaking for 7 days. And so in 1 Samuel 31:13, that's the period of mourning a dead person. And so it is as though like Job is already dead, is how they're acting. Like, their silence begins with sympathy when they get there, but it ends up with them actually not having anything helpful to say. Let's look at this. Job. So the summary of Job is chapter 1 and 2. You're going to see the introduction, the story of Job that I just read. Chapter 3, you're going to see Job lament. Like, he's like crying out to the Lord. He's like angry. He's frustrated. He's confused. Chapter 4 through 14, you're going to see the first cycle of speeches from his friends. And chapter 15 through 21, you're going to see the second cycle of speeches from his friends. And the chapters 22 through 26, you're going to see the third cycle of speeches with him and his friends. And so then in chapters 27 through 31, it's Job like summoning up the speeches. And chapters 32 through 42, the answers come to Job, like God answers him. And it's also the introduction of the fourth person, Elihu. So in Job 4 through 21, in the first and second cycle of the speeches, you see the first friend, Eliphaz, speak, and Job replies. Then you see Bildad speak, and then Job replies. Then you see Zophar speak, and Job replies. And that happens 2 times, all right? So then in Job, when you get to 22 through 26, the third cycle, Eliphaz speaks, and then Job replies. Bildad speaks, and then Job replies. Zophar does not speak the last time. So as you can see, like, the bulk of this book is dialogue with the 3 friends who try to deal with Job. They try to tell Job why he was suffering, and it's just very, like, it's very eloquent. It's like poetic. And so they're coming in. Eliphaz, he comes in, his first speech, it sounds good, but he argued that Job was suffering because of his own sin in his life. He's telling Job, like, confess any concealed sin that you have, and that's going to alleviate your punishment. His arguments are well supported, but God, when you read to the end of the book, actually God declares that he was wrong in what he was saying. After Eliphaz gives that first speech, Job replies saying, "I'm innocent." He's proclaiming his innocence. Then in the second speech, Eliphaz, his second speech around, he says that Job does not fear God. If Job did fear God, then he wouldn't be facing so much suffering. All right, and then the third speech from Eliphaz, when Job responds to that second speech, he tells his friends that they're miserable comforters. Like, basically, he was like, "You guys suck." This is what he was saying. And so the third speech from Eliphaz offers, it's in Job 22, and this time he accuses Job of great wrongdoings. It says, "Is not your wickedness great? Are not your sins endless?" He then proceeds to list all of Job's supposed sins, and then just from like his perspective, and Job replies by asking God to intervene on his behalf. So that's a very small condensed of one of the first friend's speeches and Job's replies. The second friend is Bildad. His first go around, he's basically saying that Job is a hypocrite. That's basically what he's saying, and that Job is impure. Job responds to him, and his response is that if he wants to plead his case before God, like, he's lamenting the fact that there is no one to intervene on his behalf, and he's wanting to plead his case. The second speech from Bildad is in Job 18, and it focuses on the theme that God punishes the wicked. And his logic is that since Job is being quote unquote punished, then he's done something wrong, like he's in the wicked category. And Job responds with a plea to be left alone. He's like, how long will your words torment me, and how long will you crush me with your words? Job's like, you guys are sucking at this. And then the third Bildad speech is in Job 25. It focuses on the idea that a person cannot be righteous before God, and that the center of this chapter is, how then can man be in the right before God? How can he who is born of a woman be pure? And so Job answers this with sarcasm, arguing that only God can know all things and fully understand the situation. The third friend, Zophar, his overall thing was that he argued that there must have been something in Job's life that caused this. And so Zophar only gives 2 speeches, like I said in the beginning. And his was kind of like the strongest of the speeches. And he declares that Job deserved even worse than what he was getting. He says, Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. God. And so Job responds that it was the Lord who brought this suffering upon him. And in chapter 13, he still maintains his innocence. He's like, I know I will be vindicated. Zophar's second speech focuses on the theme that one who commits wickedness will suffer for that wickedness. So you can see they all kind of have this theme of like, obviously, Job, you have done something to allow this. And so in his words, he said, a flood will carry off his house, rushing waters on the day of God's wrath. Such is the fate God allots the wicked, the heritage appointed for them by God. And then Job answers that God, for some reason, does allow the wicked to prosper. They spend their years in prosperity and go down to the grave in peace. I'm telling you, it's a lot. This is a very quick rundown. So after this, we see a fourth person show up, and his name is Elihu. And when God finally answers, when God in his appointed time answers Job, that sounds better, he actually condemns the first 3 speeches, but he doesn't condemn Elihu's. Elihu kind of came in with a different approach, and he was more of a brother, of like an intercessor, than coming in like judging every single thing that Job was doing. And he actually speaks up, and it says he is very angry with Job for justifying himself rather than God, and with Job's 3 friends, because they had found no way to refute Job and yet had condemned him. So he is suggesting in his dialogue that the suffering of Job just is a higher purpose, and it may be more moral than, a quote-unquote punishment. And so he actually condemns Job's 3 other friends, and Job's claim of being without sin, Elihu condemns that as well, like of Job's claim of being fully without sin. And he declares God's justice, and he condemns Job's attitude toward God, and he exalts God's greatness. And Elihu's he has a 4-part speech, is followed by God breaking his silence and coming in and answering Job. And so God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind. And it's a storm, so it's vividly described by Elihu in chapter 37. And so these are just some other facts of when, God spoke through a whirlwind. God brought Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind. God's presence is in the whirlwind. God's coming is like a whirlwind. God appeared to Ezekiel in a whirlwind. So the Lord, when he comes in and he starts talking to them, or to Job, he opens with a rebuke. Job has not concealed secret sins, as his friends have said, but Job has said things about God that he shouldn't have said. And so God offers, he comes in and he offers some responses to Job, and he's asking questions. He starts like a science test, and he comes in, he's like, do you know the creation of the world? Because he did rebuke Job because Job was saying things that he shouldn't have said. And he said, do you know the boundaries of the sea? Do you understand the nature of the earth? Do you comprehend the nature of light, darkness, and the sky? Do you understand the rain and its effects? Do you know the nature of clouds? Do you know the nature of the weather, the human mind? Do you know about a master, or the do you know about or master the wild mountain goats? Do you know about or master the wild donkey or the wild ox? Do you understand ostriches and horses and hawks? And so, of course, everything that Job answered, the response to that is, no, I don't command the universe. Like, I don't have the answer to any of those questions. Like, I've only lived a short time. So basically, God is essentially saying, like, Job, if you can answer these questions, if you're fit to answer these questions, and then you're fit to question me and like in my ways of doing things. But if you can't answer them, then you do not have a place to demand answers from me, basically is what he was saying. So he was, this is a quote by some guy named Smick, but I like it. It says, Job was simply overwhelmed with mysteries and paradoxes for which he had no answers, but in the midst of it all, he came to understand what was too good to be told, that God knows what he is doing in his universe. God knows what he is doing in his universe. And so Job was basically like saying that God had fallen asleep on the job, basically, and he wasn't behind the wheel of the universe, is what he was saying. And God's response is direct, and it shows how his attention is actually on every single little tiny detail in the operation of the universe. God is, he knows all kind of perspectives. He knows all kind of details that Job has never even imagined and never will. And God was putting him in his place, saying, like, can you answer these questions? Have you done this? And so God, he made his first point. That's what he was doing. So Job's many accusations of divine neglect or incompetence failed. And it turns out God is intimately familiar with every single molecule and creature in the world. And he knows how it works. He knows how it functions. And so Job ends up confessing his arrogance. And God responds again, this time to Job, to take up the divine throne and run the universe for the day. And he's like, can you do this? Can you do it? And so, Job doesn't know like what he's asking for when he demands that God uses the strict principle of retribution to reward every good deed and punish every bad one. Because in theory, that sounds right. But in execution, it would create a world where no human would ever have the chance for trial or error or growth or change or any of that. And so the last final response from God is he introduces two fantastic creatures, one called Behemoth and the other Leviathan. Now, I was saying earlier, Job this is all stuff that you can take and dissect. These two creatures are, I suggest that are very in depth. Yeah, and study them out. They're like dinosaur creatures. The behemoth is the land dinosaur, and the Leviathan in the sea. All right, so I'm not going into all that because those are a whole teaching into itself, and I might teach on that later on after this Bible study. So, yes, to the comment, was Job thinking he was above reproach? I think so. I think that he thought that he was above, yeah, because it says he ends up confessing for arrogance. So, yeah. So at the end of the book, you have Job's repentance and restoration. Job's friends are rebuked, and Job is vindicated. He's blessed, and then his whole entire inventory of everything he had is doubled. So that is a quick 35-minute rundown of Job. Take your time, go through it, because it is a lot more deeper than that. So for the book of Psalms, the book of Proverbs, and the Song of Solomon, tonight is a little bit different because those three books, you are not going to see my face teach it. I have a video for you to watch. And the only reason I'm doing that is because Psalms, Proverbs, and Song of Solomon are poetical books, and there is nothing that I would say any different than what these guys would say in their video. They are forerunners that have went ahead before and have trailblazed the way in this fun, creative way of how they teach this. I love these videos, so I wanted to, it just gives you a full fundamental foundation of these books. And so, yeah, let's start with the first one, the Book of Psalms.
The Book of Psalms. It's a collection of 150 ancient Hebrew poems, songs, and prayers that come from all different periods in Israel's history. Many of these poems are connected with King David, 73 actually, and he was known as a poet and a harp player. But there are many different authors behind these poems. There's the poems of Asaph, or from the sons of Korah, and some are from other worship leaders in the temple. Even Solomon and Moses have their own poems, and nearly 1/3 of these are anonymous. Now, many of these poems came to be used by the choirs that sang in Israel's temple, but the Book of Psalms is actually not a hymn book. At some point in the period after Israel's exile to Babylon, these ancient poems were gathered together and intentionally arranged into the Book of Psalms before us. And it has a very unique design and message that you're not going to notice unless you read it from beginning to end. Now, to see how the Book of Psalms is designed, it's actually most helpful to start at the end. The book concludes with 5 poems of praise to the God of Israel, and each one begins and ends with the word hallelujah, which is Hebrew for a command to tell a group of people to praise Yah, which is short for the divine name Yahweh. Now, that's a really nice 5-part arrangement, and it looks like someone's giving us a conclusion here to the book. So it invites the question, does the book have any other signs of intentional design? If you pay attention to the headings of the poems, you'll notice that at 5 places, your Bible translators have the heading Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, 4, and 5 at various points, and that these divide the book into 5 large sections. Now, the reason for this is that the final poem in each of those sections have a very similar ending that looks like an editorial addition. It reads something like, "May the Lord, the God of Israel, be blessed forever and ever. Amen and amen." So the book has a conclusion. It has an internal organization into 5 main parts, and so the natural place to go from here is now the beginning, to look for an introduction. And what do we find? Psalms 1 and 2, which stand outside of Book 1 because most of the poems in Book 1 are linked to David, except Psalms 1 and 2, which are anonymous. Psalm 1 celebrates how blessed the person is who meditates on the Torah, prayerfully reading it day and night and then obeying it. Now, the word Torah simply means teaching, and more specifically, it came to refer to the 5 books of Moses that begin the Old Testament. And here, actually, the word seems to be used with both meanings in mind, which explains why it has 5 main parts. The Book of Psalms is being offered as a new Torah that will teach God's people the lifelong practice of prayer as they strive to obey God's commands given in the first Torah. Psalm 2 is a poetic reflection on God's promise to King David from 2 Samuel chapter 7, that one day a messianic king would come and establish God's kingdom over the world, defeat evil and rebellion among the nations. Now, Psalm 2 concludes by saying that all those who take refuge in the messianic king will be blessed, precisely the word used to open Psalm 1. And so together, these 2 poems tell us that the Book of Psalms is designed to be the prayer book of God's people as they strive to be faithful to the commands of the Torah, as they hope and wait for the future messianic kingdom. Now, with these 2 themes introduced, we can start to see how the smaller books have been designed as well around these 2 ideas. So, for example, Book 1 has right at the center a collection of poems, Psalms 15 through 24, that opens and closes with a call to covenant faithfulness. And then, Psalm 16 to 18, we find a depiction of David as a model of this kind of faithfulness. So he calls out to God to deliver him, and God elevates him as king. Now, in the corresponding set of poems, Psalms 20 to 23, the David of the past has become an image of the Messianic king of the future, who will also call out to God. He will be delivered and then given a kingdom over the nations. And then right at the center of this collection is a poem, Psalm 19, dedicated to praising God for the Torah. So here we go. The two themes from Psalms 1 and 2 are bound together tightly here. Book 2 opens with two poems that are united in their hope for a future return to the temple in Zion. And this is an image closely associated with the hope of the Messianic kingdom. Then Book 2 closes with a poem that depicts the future reign of the Messianic king over all of the nation. This poem's really amazing because it echoes all these other passages from the prophets about the Messianic kingdom. And it concludes by saying that this king's reign will bring about the fulfillment of God's ancient promise to Abraham to bring God's blessing to all of the nations. Book 3 also concludes with a poem reflecting on God's promise to David, but this time in light of Israel's exile. So the poet remembers how God said he would never abandon the line of David. But now he's looking at Israel's rebellion and its result in destruction and exile and the downfall of the line of David. And so the poet ends by asking God to never forget his promise to David. Book 4 is designed to respond to this crisis of exile. So the opening poem returns us back to Israel's roots with a prayer of Moses. And he does what he did on Mount Sinai after the golden calf incident, which is to call upon God to show mercy. The center of Book 4 is dominated by a group of poems that announce that the Lord, the God of Israel, reigns as the true king of the world, and that all creation, trees, mountains, rivers, are all summoned to celebrate that future day when God will bring his justice and kingdom over all the world. Book 5 opens with a series of poems that affirm that God hears the cries of his people and will one day send the future king to defeat evil and bring God's kingdom. This book also contains two larger collections, one called the Hallel and the other called the Songs of Ascents. Each one of these collections concludes with a poem about the future Messianic kingdom. And these two collections together, they sustain the hope for a future Exodus-like act of God to redeem his people. And then, right between them is Psalm 119. It's the longest poem in the book. It's an alphabet poem. Each line begins with a new letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it explores the wonder and the gift of the Torah as God's word to his people. So here we go. The themes from Psalm 1 and 2, Torah and Messiah, combined all together here in Book 5, which brings us all the way back to that 5-poem conclusion. In the center poem, Psalm 148, all creation is summoned to praise the God of Israel because he has, quote, raised up a horn for his people. Now the horn here, it's a metaphor of a bull's horn raised in victory. And this image echoes back to the same image used in Hannah's song, 1 Samuel chapter 2, but also to the earlier Psalm 132. The horn is a symbol for the future Messianic king and his victory over evil. It's a fitting conclusion to this amazing book. Now, here's one more thing that you are likely going to miss if you don't read this book in order. There's lots of different kinds of poems in the book of Psalms, but they all basically fall into two big categories, either poems of lament or poems of praise. Poems of lament express pain, confusion, and anger about how horrible the world is and how horrible the things are happening to the poet. And so these poems draw attention to what's wrong in the world, and they ask God to do something about it. There's a lot of these in the book, which tells us something important, that lament is an appropriate response to the evil that we see in our world. But what you'll notice is that lament poems predominate earlier in the book, in books 1 through 3. But pay attention, because you'll see praise poems occasionally too. Praise poems are poems of joy and celebration, and they draw attention to what's good in the world, and they retell stories of what God has done in our lives and thank God for it. In books 4 and 5, you'll notice that praise poems come to outnumber lament poems, and it all culminates in that 5-part hallelujah conclusion. So this shift from lament to praise, this is profound, and it tells us something about the nature of prayer. As we hope for the Messianic kingdom, as the book teaches us to do, this will create tension for us as we look out on the tragic state of our world and of our lives. And so the Psalms teach us not to ignore the pain of our lives, but at the same time, biblical faith is forward-looking, looking to the promise of God's future Messianic kingdom. And so Torah and Messiah, lament and praise, faith and hope. That's what the book of Psalms is all about.
I think those guys are so creative. That's the Bible Project. So I use them a lot also when we were doing teaching with the youth. That is just a a full overview of the book of Psalms. You didn't have to hear it from me. You got to see a cool illustration. I also have one for the book of Proverbs and Song of Songs, because there's nothing more that I can add in that these guys are saying in these books for this time frame of teaching. There are other chapters and books and stuff that I have gone in more in depth with, and I will in the future. Just for these three books, these three poetical books, I just really love their interpretation. Their stuff is free online. It's the Bible Project. And so the book of Proverbs by the same people. So like I said, this week is a little bit different, but I hope you stay and continue to watch this one. So here's the book of Proverbs.
The book of Proverbs. The word proverb typically refers to a short, clever saying that offers some kind of wisdom, and this book has a lot of those. But they're almost all in the center section of the book, chapters 10 to 29. But there is way more going on in the book of Proverbs, especially at the beginning, chapters 1 through 9, and the conclusion, chapters 30 and 31. The book's been designed with an introduction, chapter 1, verses 1 through 9, and it first of all links this book to King Solomon. Now remember the story in 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon had asked God for wisdom to lead Israel well. And so Solomon became known as the wisest man in the ancient world. And we're told in 1 Kings chapter 4 that he wrote thousands of proverbs and poems and collected knowledge about plants and animals. So Solomon was like the fountainhead of Israel's wisdom literature. So while not all the material in this book is written by him personally, he is where Israel's wisdom tradition began. The introduction says that by reading this book, you too can gain wisdom. Now, wisdom for most of us means knowledge, but the Hebrew word chokhmah means much more than just mental activity. It refers to action also. So think skill or applied knowledge. This is why back in the book of Exodus, chapter 31, it was artists and craftsmen in Israel who were said to have chokhmah. So the purpose of this book is to help you develop a set of practical skills for living well in God's world. And this gets linked with another key idea in the introduction, the fear of the Lord. Now, fear here is not about terror. It's about a healthy sense of reverence and awe for God and about my place in the universe. It's a moral mindset that recognizes I am not God and that I don't get to make up my own definitions of good and evil and right and wrong. Rather, I need to humble myself before God and embrace God's definition of right and wrong, even when that's inconvenient for me. Now, this introduction leads us into the first main section of the book, chapters 1 through 9, which also doesn't contain short one-liner proverbs. Rather, what we find here are 10 speeches from a father to a son about how the son should listen to wisdom and cultivate the fear of the Lord and live accordingly, which means a life of virtue and integrity and generosity, all of which lead to success and peace. And the father warns his son also about folly and evil and stupid decisions that will breed selfishness and pride, all leading to ruin and shame. And so the son should make the pursuit of wisdom and the fear of the Lord his highest goal in life. And this way of thinking, it forms the moral logic of this entire book. Now, these speeches from the father also clue us into what biblical wisdom literature is and how it's different from other parts of the Bible. These books explore how to live well in God's world, but wisdom is not the same as law, like what Moses gave Israel at Mount Sinai. And it's not the same as prophecy, divine speech to God's people. Rather, wisdom literature has the accumulated insight of God's people through the generations about how to live in a way that honors God and others. And so, through the book of Proverbs now, these human words about wisdom have been put together as God's word and wisdom to his people, which connects to the other thing you find in chapters 1 through 9. There are 4 poems from Lady Wisdom. Here, wisdom has been poetically personified as a woman who calls out to humanity to pay attention and to seek her. Wisdom says that she is woven into the fabric of the universe, and so wherever you see people making wise decisions, they are relying on her. So you see someone being generous or having sexual integrity or upholding justice, they are drawing on wisdom. These Lady Wisdom poems, they're a creative, poetic way of exploring this idea that we live in God's moral universe, and that goodness and justice are objective realities that we ignore to our own peril. And so fearing the Lord, living wisely, it's living along the grain of the universe. Now together, these two sets of speeches from the Father and Lady Wisdom, they make a powerful claim about this book, that you're not simply reading good advice, you're reading God's own invitation to learn wisdom from previous generations. And so in the next section of the book, chapters 10 through 29, we find hundreds of ancient proverbs, and they apply wisdom and the fear of the Lord to every life topic you could imagine: family, work, neighborhood, friendship, sex, marriage, money, anger, forgiveness, alcohol, debt, everything. And these are all filtered through the value system of Proverbs 1 through 9. Now, these Proverbs, they're all pretty short, they're easy to memorize, and actually this section of the book is meant to become a reference work that you return to time and time again throughout the years, which raises some important issues in learning how to read these Proverbs. First of all, Proverbs are by nature about probabilities. So you fear the Lord and you make wise, good choices, things will likely go well for you. And if you don't fear the Lord, you're foolish, your life will likely not go so well. Now, that is all often true, but not always. Which leads to the next point, that Proverbs are not promises. They're not formulas for success. So, some Proverbs, for example. The fear of the Lord prolongs your life, but the years of the wicked are cut short. Or, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't turn from it. So yes, fearing God, being a moral person, will most likely lead to a better, longer life, and raising your kids in a stable, loving home does set them up well, but there are no guarantees. Lots of things can and often do go wrong in our world. And so lastly, Proverbs by nature focus on the general rule, but not the exceptions, which are many. And the wisdom books actually aren't ignorant of that. The exceptions are what the other wisdom books, Job and Ecclesiastes, are all about. And together, these acknowledge that life is too complex for simple formulas, which is why we need all of the wisdom books together to get the bigger picture. This all leads to the final section of the book, two large collections of poems. First, poems from a man named Agur, who begins by acknowledging his own ignorance and folly and his great need for God's wisdom. And then Agur discovers that divine wisdom has been given to him in the scriptures, which teach him how to live well. And so Agur is put before us as like a model reader of the book of Proverbs, somebody who's always open to hearing God's wisdom through the scriptures. The final poems are connected to a man named Lemuel. He's a non-Israelite king, and he passes on the wisdom that was given to him by his mom. It's guidance for being a wise and just leader. And then the final poem is an acrostic or an alphabet poem where each line begins with a new letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the entire poem's about the woman of noble character. It depicts a woman who lives according to the wisdom of Proverbs and stands like a model of someone who takes God's wisdom and then translates it into practical decisions in everyday life, at work or at home, in her family and in her community. So the book opened with words from a father to a son about listening to Lady Wisdom, and so now the book closes by offering the words of a mother to her son about a woman who lives wisely. The book of Proverbs is for every person in every season of life. It's a guide for living wisely and well in God's good world. And that's what the book of Proverbs is all about.
Hi. All right. We're back for, I hope you enjoyed that. We're back for Ecclesiastes. You have me for Ecclesiastes. The author of Ecclesiastes is said to be Solomon. Where are we in this book, in the book of Ecclesiastes. This is Solomon's reign as king of Israel. It lasted from around 970 BC to around 930 BC. The book of Ecclesiastes was written towards the end of his reign around 935 BC. You can cut this book into 3 parts. Part 1 is chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. It introduces somebody named the teacher. And part 2, you can go from chapter 1, verse 3 to chapter 12, verse 8, and it details all the words of the teacher. Part 3 is chapter 12, verse 9 through the end, chapter 14. And it is there four. Did I write that wrong? Oh gosh, I messed up on one of my slides. I didn't add the correct number of slides coming up, so just bear with me on that. But Ecclesiastes records the part 3 is it presents the author's reflection on the words of the teacher, and so it records the words of the teacher, and it's Koheleth is the name. Koheleth, I don't know, but it means the teacher. So let's look at the chapter summary of Ecclesiastes. Did I say Ezekiel earlier? I feel like I've been saying Ezekiel. Was I saying Ezekiel? If I was meaning Ecclesiastes. So you have the chapter summary. You have chapter 1, the meaninglessness of life, and then chapter 2, you have the futility of pleasure and wisdom. Chapter 3, the time for everything and the judgment of God. Chapter 4, the oppression, envy, and loneliness of man. Chapter 5, you have the fear of God and the vanity of wealth. Chapter 6, you have the unsatisfied life and the unknown future. Chapter 7, you have the contrast between wisdom and folly. Chapter 8, you have the mystery of God's justice and man's destiny. Chapter 9, you have the uncertainty of life and the certainty of death. And chapter 10, the consequences of wisdom and folly. In chapter 11, the advice for a meaningful life. Chapter 12, the conclusion of the matter. Give me 1 second. I'm going to look something up real quick. Yeah, 12. I don't know why I wrote 14 on that other. So sorry. Yes, there's 12 chapters. That's what I was like, where did 14 come from? So in my notes, I had 14, but yes, there's 12 chapters in Ecclesiastes. I keep saying it. Why do I keep saying that? And so the key themes of Ecclesiastes is lack of meaning and purpose in life apart from God, the limitations of wisdom, enjoying God's good gifts, and the fear of God. Now, like when you read this book, it seems like it is just like hopelessness and despair, and it seems like really heavy and everything is horrible. And so you just have to because many people misunderstand it because it penetrates like the human condition. Like it looks beyond death. Because it can seem pessimistic at first if you only stop at death. Like it's like encouraging you to look beyond what is just in front of your eyes, in front of you, like to look past, to look into the into the spirit, basically. No matter what your circumstances are, call it out as what God sees it, call it forth. And it speaks into 10 vanities in Ecclesiastes. It talks about human wisdom, wise and foolish die alike, human laboring and the rested die alike, human purpose God disposes, envy, success brings envy, not joy. It talks on greed, get more and remain empty, Fame, one day popular, then forgotten. 7, wealth, money does not satisfy. Coveting, wanting begets more wanting. Uh, Frivolity, like time wasted, brings a sad end. And recognition, bad, are often honored by men. So like I said, it's kind of, you kind of read it, and it started out like Eeyore from Pooh wrote it. But it's like, it's a heavy book, and it's like, it's saying like, hey, like everybody faces challenges. um like, and don't be too busy to where you overlook God. Like, don't, like, because there's going to be uncertainties in life, and in our life, we have to surrender to the fear of the Lord. Is That's what he sums it up in saying. He sums it up in like, um let me see if I can find that quote, because I don't know. Yet for God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. It really sets the stage, into for the book of Romans, because Romans 8:20 and 21 says, "For the creature was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who hath subjected the same in hope, because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God." And the book can seem hopeless, but it's tells you, when it wraps up, it's telling you there is no hope unless you have God. There is no life unless you worship God and follow God. There is no meaning unless you worship God and follow God. And so, like I was saying, this book can seem depressing, but it's an encouragement, like, to look past our life, look past your circumstances into the unknown of God's kingdom. And so I suggest you to read it, because when you read it, you can see, like, even the people in the Old Testament, like, they suffered, like, they went through hardship, and they, even when you get to, to the New Testament, they suffered, they went through hardship. And this is like kind of like a dialogue of the teacher, and he's saying, yeah, dude, like, you're gonna have this is what he's going through. But you have to look towards God. You have to look towards the Redeemer. You have to look towards the greater kingdom. And that's why when the very first introduction of this, I said, like, he is not of this world, and so that should be encouraging and a blessing to know that he is not of this world. He is outside of this world. And so that is who we look to. That is who we put our hope into, and our trust and our faith into. And there has to be the fear of the Lord, instilled in you. And the fear of the Lord is not this, like, this terrified that he's going to, like, strike you dead type thing. That's not it. It's like a reverence and an awe and a respect, and and of not taking his name in vain, of not standing up and saying, yeah, I'm a Christian, and then not walking fully in the word, And so this is calling you and urging you, like, yeah, you're, like, there's gonna be, like, sometimes there's stuff that doesn't make sense, like sometimes we do have question, why do the wise and the foolish die alike, like, why, because he discusses that, why success can bring envy and not joy at time. Why does money not always satisfy? Like, he talks about all those things, and then in the end he is telling you it's all worthless, meaningless crap. Like, if you don't have God, if you don't have the creator of the one true king, like, if you don't follow him, then it's hopeless and bleak. And so that is Ecclesiastes. So, like I was saying, this week is a little bit different. We're just doing an overview. So, the last and final is Song of Solomon. And like I said, this is not going to be me. It's going to be these Bible Project guys again. And then you will see me after it.
The Song of Songs It's a well-known but not so well understood book of the Bible. It's 8 chapters of love poetry. And while there is an introduction and a conclusion, the book doesn't have any kind of rigid literary design, and that's because it's a collection of poems. They're not meant to be dissected or taken apart. They're meant to be read as a flowing whole and simply enjoyed. The first line of the book tells us that it's the Song of Songs, which is a Hebrew idiom like the Holy of Holies or the King of Kings. It's a Hebrew way of saying the greatest thing. So this is the greatest song of all songs. Then we're told in the first line that this Song of Songs is of Solomon, which could mean that he is the author. His name does begin the book, after all. But as you read the poems, you discover that the main voice is that of a woman called the Beloved. And while there is also a male voice, it does not seem to be Solomon's. Solomon is mentioned a couple times in the poems, but he's never a speaker. And you do have to admit, Solomon is a very odd candidate as the author of this book, given the fact that he had 700 wives. For the lovers in the Song of Songs, they are the only ones in the world for each other. So the of Solomon likely means in the wisdom tradition of Solomon. He was known for his wisdom, his poetry, his love of learning about every part of life. And Solomon became the father of wisdom literature in Israel. And so his legacy is here carried on through a collection of love poems that explores the human experience of love and sexual desire. The opening poem introduces us to the basic theme of this book. We hear the voice of the young woman who delights in her man, a shepherd. Now, she's not married to him yet, but it becomes clear that they're engaged and they cannot wait to be together. From the introduction, the poems flow back and forth from the woman's voice to the man's, shifting from scene to scene without any kind of clear linear sequence or storyline. The poems move in these symphonic cycles, and key images and ideas get repeated and developed. So, one of the basic themes uniting the poems is the intense desire that this couple has for each other, expressed through their constant seeking and finding. So, after the opening poem, they're separated but on the hunt for one another. So the woman calls out, or she'll wake up from a dream or go looking for her lover, and more than once they'll find each other, they'll embrace, and then right when things start to get a bit racy, the scene will suddenly end, and a new one will start. They're separated, looking for each other, and on it goes. Another repeated theme is the joy of the couple's physical attraction for one another. So multiple times they'll pause and describe each other with these elaborate metaphors. And here it's very helpful to know that these images and metaphors in Hebrew poetry are not primarily visual. If you try and paint a picture of these people based on the metaphors, you will end up with something that looks very, very strange. What you're supposed to do is reflect on the meaning of these images as they relate to the man and the woman. So you'll read through the poetic cycles, and the tension will keep building in their desire and joy and attraction. And this spiraling repetition is a poetic way of heightening and focusing on the mystery and power of sexual love. It all comes together in the conclusion, which pauses to summarize what these poems are all about. Love is as strong as death. Its passions are as severe as the grave. Its flashes are of fire, a divine flame. Many waters cannot extinguish love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, he would be utterly scorned. The poem highlights the power and the intensity of love, how it's both beautiful but also dangerous. Like fire, love can destroy people if it's abused, or be life-giving if it's protected. Ultimately, love expresses the insatiable human longing to know and be fully known and desired by another. Love is one of the most transcendent and mysterious experiences in human life, and as a part of the Bible's wisdom tradition, this book says it's a gift from God. After this, there's an odd poem about Solomon trying to do what the previous poem just said was impossible, to buy love. The woman rejects Solomon's offer, and then the book concludes with the man and the woman. They're separate once more on the hunt for each other. He calls to hear her voice. She begs him to run away with her, and that's how the book ends. Just totally open-ended. But that's a lot like love, which never truly concludes, because there's always more to discover and pursue in your beloved. And so true love has no end, and neither does this book. Now, through history, the big question raised by the Song of Songs is, what on earth is love poetry doing in the Bible? There have been three main interpretations of this book throughout history. In Jewish tradition, it's been read as an allegory, each character a symbol. So the woman is Israel, the man is God, and their love is a symbol of the covenant between God and Israel made at Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah. This view flowed into the Christian tradition, but the characters were swapped. So it's about Christ's love for his people, the church. And this interpretation was inspired by Paul's words in Ephesians 5, that a Christian husband's love for his wife is a symbol of Christ's love for the church. What's interesting is that in the last 100 years, archaeological discoveries among Israel's ancient neighbors in Egypt and Babylon has turned up all kinds of ancient love poetry that's very similar in language and imagery to the Song of Songs. We see that love poetry was a meaningful part of Israel's cultural environment, which has led most scholars today to view the Song of Songs as what it presents itself to be, an arrangement of Israelite love poetry reflecting on the divine gift of love. But that doesn't mean that it's only ancient love poetry. There's a key feature of these poems that sticks out when you read them as a part of the Old Testament, and that's the overwhelming use of garden imagery. There are powerful echoes of the Garden of Eden and the idyllic scene between the married couple in the early chapters of Genesis. So the image of the man and the woman naked and vulnerable, but completely unified and safe with one another. This resonates in the background of the Song of Songs. It's as if in these poems we are witnessing the love of a couple whose relationship is untainted by selfishness and sin. And so ultimately the song holds out hope that even though our own relationships are so often distorted by selfishness, love is a transcendent gift, and it's meant to point us to something greater, to the gift of God's love that will one day permeate and transform his beloved world. And that's what the Song of Songs is all about.
Hey, so did you know, you probably didn't know because I didn't know this, that Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon, rabbis would not let anyone study the book until they were over 30 years old. And so it's actually, there's only 117 verses, but it is one of the most like emotionally controversial book in the Bible. And I guess because people get so bent out of shape when it starts talking about love, and there's like sexual connotation in it, but God created it all, and I hope that little video explained it well for you. So next week we have Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, and Ezekiel. And so those are probably going to be, especially Isaiah and Jeremiah, are probably going to be a little bit more in depth and more crystallized than what you got this week, if that makes sense. So I'm glad that I could get all this in under an hour and 15 minutes. I hope you take the time to read through Job, read through Ecclesiastes, read through these books, and just get some wisdom and some discernment from the Holy Spirit on them, because they're really good books. And yeah, so